The sky tore open with a violent ripple, revealing the Zelthari warships descending upon Earth like predatory beasts. Towering over cities, their obsidian hulls reflected the dying embers of human resistance. They did not come to negotiate. They came to conquer. Their war machines struck first, precise, calculated devastation. Missiles rained down, reducing military strongholds to smoldering ruins. Fighter jets, outmaneuvered by alien drones, fell from the sky like dying stars. Humanity's weapons, built for wars against themselves, proved laughable against a species bred for interstellar domination. Within hours, Earth's major powers crumbled. The Zelthari, with their cold efficiency, moved swiftly. Governments surrendered. Communication lines fell silent. Humanity, once so proud, so sure of its place in the universe, was reduced to a planet of refugees, cowering beneath alien rule. The Zelthari War Council observed Earth's leaders with amusement. These creatures were weak, physically fragile, barely evolved. Their resistance had been a brief inconvenience, nothing more. The conquest was a formality, but protocol demanded a response. A final demand for submission. A transmission was sent. Surrender and the destruction would end. Fight and humanity would be extinguished. There was no response. Hours passed. The Zelthari, expecting a plea for mercy, instead received something unexpected. A single message. A declaration. You attacked Earth. So we are sending our weakest soldiers. The Zelthari were perplexed. Was this a final act of defiance? A joke? They scanned intercepted transmissions, analyzed military databases. The phrase made no tactical sense. Who were these weakest soldiers? Had humanity truly surrendered, offering their most feeble as tribute? When the first wave of human reinforcements arrived, the Zelthari's confusion deepened. These were not elite warriors, not super soldiers, not genetically enhanced fighters. No, the ones sent to fight them were rejects, a ragtag assembly, criminals with records longer than their weapons, gamers who had never held a real gun but had conquered 1,000 virtual battlefields, veterans deemed unfit due to injuries, their bodies betraying their former glory, engineers, hackers, mechanics, people with no business on the front lines of a war. The Zelthari laughed. They expected a swift, effortless victory, but their arrogance had already sealed their fate. The battle began, and it was unlike anything the Zelthari had encountered before. Their warriors, trained in honorable combat, found themselves blindsided by an enemy with no rules. The convicts fought dirty, ambushes, deception, psychological warfare. A Zelthari officer, expecting a fair duel, was instead struck from behind with a makeshift explosive. Another was led into an alleyway, only to be buried under a collapsing building, detonated by human engineers. The gamers, dismissed as useless, became the deadliest tacticians. They weren't soldiers, but they had spent years perfecting war digitally. Their reflexes outpaced Zelthari AI. Their understanding of simulated combat translated perfectly into real engagements. Where Zelthari commanders relied on logic, these humans operated on instinct, unpredictability. They baited enemies into kill zones, outmaneuvered them with strategies ripped from battle simulations. And the veterans, the forgotten warriors, became humanity's deadliest weapon. The Zelthari saw them as broken, unable to fight. But war wasn't just about muscle. It was about knowledge, experience. These were survivors of countless battles, men and women who had adapted to the horrors of war. Missing limbs didn't make them weak. It made them smarter. One blind soldier, dismissed as useless, really listened, and detected cloaked Zelthari units by their faint hum, directing artillery fire with pinpoint accuracy. The Zelthari's confusion turned to frustration. Their technology should have guaranteed victory. Their tactics should have crushed these so-called weak humans. But every expectation was shattered. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like survivors. In the span of days, the Zelthari advance slowed. Their forces, meant to overwhelm, were now being systematically dismantled. They weren't losing to superior firepower. They were losing to cunning, adaptability, an enemy that refused to play by the rules. The Zelthri High Command, for the first time, felt something foreign, something unsettling. Doubt. Humanity should have fallen. Instead, their weakest had turned the tide, and the war was just beginning. The Zelthri adjusted their strategy. Their warriors, bred for battle, adapted to countless alien species. But humanity defied categorization. They weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. They weren't the most advanced. And yet, they fought like nothing the Zelthri had ever encountered. Tactical AI, the pride of the Zelthri fleet, processed battle scenarios in milliseconds. Against most species, this precision ensured victory. Against humans, it faltered. The problem wasn't the calculations, it was the unpredictability. The human soldiers, untrained in conventional warfare, didn't move in patterns. They didn't adhere to logic. Their strategies were erratic, chaotic. And somehow they worked. A Zelthri strike force pursued a small group of human fighters through a ruined city. The chase should have been routine. Zelthri scouts had predicted the humans' possible routes with 98% accuracy. But what they hadn't accounted for was the presence of gamers. Their entire lives had been spent navigating digital war zones, thinking 5 moves ahead. They led their pursuers into a dead-end alley, except it wasn't. It was a carefully planned kill box. Makeshift explosives, hack drones, snipers positioned for the perfect crossfire. The Zelthri were eradicated before they even realized they'd been trapped. Elsewhere, honor-bound Zelthri warriors engaged in what they believed was fair combat. They had underestimated the convicts. These were men and women who had survived Earth's most brutal prisons, who had spent years learning how to exploit weakness. A Zelthri commander issued a challenge, a one-on-one duel, as was tradition. The human opponent smiled, nodded, and as soon as the commander lowered his guard, a hidden knife plunged into his throat. There was no honor here, only survival. The Zelthri, growing desperate, deployed their elite units, genetically enhanced soldiers, towering behemoths with armor that could withstand direct artillery fire. Against any normal force, they were unstoppable. Against humans, they became slow-moving targets. The engineers, the so-called non-combatants, turned the environment against them. Booby traps, structural collapses, EMPs repurposed from scavenged tech. The Zelthri giants walked into battle expecting glory. They found only death. The war turned psychological. Zelthri soldiers, once fearless, began hesitating. They saw comrades taken down by an enemy that didn't fight fair. Ambushes in the dead of night. Radio transmissions filled with distorted human laughter, taunting them. They had come expecting a war of strength. Instead, they had entered a nightmare. Among the human ranks, the disabled veterans proved invaluable. Where the Zelthri saw weakness, humanity found adaptation. A paraplegic sniper, overlooked by enemy scouts, eliminated high-ranking Zelthri officers from a hidden rooftop. A soldier with prosthetic limbs, once dismissed as useless, moved faster and struck harder than any ordinary human. A deaf combatant, unaffected by Zelthri sonic weapons, led assaults where others would have fallen. Victory wasn't achieved through brute force. It was won through the one thing the Zelthri couldn't predict: human ingenuity. The invaders, once arrogant, now hesitated before every engagement. Their strategies, flawless on paper, crumbled in execution. Their commanders, once confident, now questioned their every move. The Zelthri had invaded expecting dominance. Instead, they had awakened an enemy unlike any other. And now, for the first time in their empire's history, they began to consider the unthinkable. Retreat. The Zelthri refused to accept defeat. Their empire had crushed countless civilizations, reducing entire worlds to dust. They would not allow a primitive species to humiliate them. If brute force had failed, they would turn to something far worse. A biological weapon, engineered in secret, was released into the atmosphere. A virus designed to attack human DNA, spreading silently, killing efficiently. The Zelthri believed this would end the war without another shot fired. Humanity would wither, and they would take the planet unchallenged. But they had underestimated Earth once again. The engineers, scientists, and medical researchers, the ones the Zelthri had ignored, became the last line of defense. While soldiers fought on the ground, these minds fought a different war. Labs operated day and night, dissecting the alien pathogen, unraveling its secrets. The Zelthri assumed the virus was unstoppable. They hadn't considered the resilience of human science. Within days, a countermeasure was developed. The virus was not only neutralized but repurposed. The humans turned the weapon against its creators, modifying it to attack Zelthri physiology. The invaders, immune in their ships, found themselves vulnerable on the battlefield. The very air they once controlled became their enemy. With their trump card failing, the Zelthri launched their final assault. The full might of their fleet descended upon Earth, a last attempt to crush resistance. Their war machines stormed through shattered cities, their soldiers moving in disciplined waves. The humans didn't fight them head-on. They fought like they always had, using every advantage, every weakness. The cities themselves became weapons. Skyscrapers rigged with explosives collapsed onto advancing forces. Power grids were hijacked, turning entire sectors into electrified death traps. Holograms projected false troop movements, leading Zelthri into ambushes. The most feared warriors of the Empire, their so-called perfect soldiers, found themselves hunted. Human hackers, dismissed as irrelevant, infiltrated Zelthri command networks. They scrambled targeting systems, turned automated defenses against their own forces. The invaders, once in control, now fought in confusion. The final blow came not from the strongest, but from those who had been overlooked. A group of disabled veterans infiltrated the Zelthri mothership, using stolen codes to bypass security. Where trained commandos might have relied on brute force, they used strategy, patience. They planted charges in the ship's reactor core, escaping just before detonation. The explosion lit up the sky. The Zelthri fleet, witnessing the destruction of their command vessel, faltered. Their morale, already fragile, shattered completely. Across the battlefield, they abandoned their weapons. Some tried to flee. Others, too broken to resist, simply surrendered. For the first time in their empire's history, the Zelthri had been defeated. Not by a superior force, not by advanced technology, but by those they had dismissed as weak. And as the last Zelthri ship retreated into the void, the truth became undeniable. Humanity had not just survived. They had won. The war was over. The Zelthri, once so certain of their victory, had been driven from Earth in disgrace. Their empire, undefeated for centuries, had suffered its first true loss. And the galaxy had taken notice. News of humanity's triumph spread across the stars. Other alien civilizations, once indifferent to Earth's fate, now watched with caution. The Zelthri had been the gold standard of conquest, their strength unquestioned. If humanity could defeat them, then they were more than just another primitive species. They were dangerous. Survivors of the war, prisoners, misfits, disabled veterans became legends. The weakest had become Earth's greatest warriors. Military academies rewrote their doctrines, studying their tactics. No longer were soldiers judged by physical prowess alone. Adaptability, unpredictability, and sheer refusal to lose became the pillars of a new defense force. The remains of the Zelthri fleet were picked apart, their technology reverse-engineered. Scientists worked tirelessly, integrating alien advancements with human ingenuity. Within months, Earth had weapons and defenses beyond anything it had before. What was once a planet vulnerable to invasion was now one prepared for war. But victory came with consequences. Humanity had not just survived. Their defiance had sent a message. Across the galaxy, whispers turned to discussions to warnings. If the weakest among them could win against an empire, what would happen when they truly rose to power? Some feared them, some envied them, others saw an opportunity. An envoy from a distant empire arrived, offering an alliance. Not out of goodwill, but out of necessity. They had been watching, waiting. The Zelthri were not the only threat in the universe. There were others, stronger, smarter, more ruthless, and they would come sooner or later. Humanity stood at a crossroads. They could remain isolated, pretending the galaxy would leave them in peace. Or they could prepare, expand, become something more. The choice was clear. The war had proven one thing above all else: humanity was not to be underestimated. And for those still watching from the shadows, those who thought they understood Earth's limits, one fact would haunt them forever. Humanity's weakest had won this war. Imagine what would happen when they sent their strongest.